The first step in preparing yourself for a frottage drawing is getting to know your materials. Today we're going to be using a masa paper, which is a lightweight Japanese paper, and we have a large sheet of it. You'll notice when you take a look at your paper that there are two sides, a side that has a slight texture to it and a smooth side. We'll be working on the smooth side of the paper. This sheet of paper is 21.5 by 31 inches, and we want to get it into 8 sections. You could do all the math and figure out exactly the size of 1/8 of this piece of paper, and then use an X-Acto knife or a pair of scissors to cut it down. If you're like me and you try to avoid math as much as possible, thankfully there is another option. One of my preferred ways of dividing up paper is by simply folding it. For this, all you'll need is your bone folder and a ruler. You want to gently fold your paper in half the long way, and before creasing, make sure that you have lined up your corners, all 4 corners, very carefully. Once your corners are lined up, you want to move your bone folder across the paper and crease the top and bottom of your fold. You can see it better when I do it at the top. From there, you'll move your bone folder just up the fold from top to bottom to finish out that crease. Now we're going to take this same fold and just reverse it, meaning we're going to turn that mountain fold into a valley and make the paper fold in the opposite direction. Again, you want to use your bone folder to really press that fold into the paper. Folding your paper before tearing it essentially lets the paper know tear on this line, not anywhere else. So now we're ready to tear. You want to take your ruler or whatever straight edge you're working with and line it up right along that fold that you've made. In order to tear the paper, you're going to hold the ruler down with one hand, and with your opposite hand, you're going to pull the free edge of paper towards you and against the ruler. It's difficult to see here, but I'm slowly moving my hand down the ruler, applying pressure as I tear towards myself. I'm going to do this whole process once more so that you can see how it works a little better. Now I have one of the halves that I've just torn, and I'm gonna fold it in half again. So I am lining up the corners, pressing my fold to the top and bottom, and then I am going to reverse that fold just so the paper has a really great memory and is a little weaker there. So now I'm gonna tear my paper, and you'll be able to see the process a little bit better this time because I'm working with a smaller sheet of paper. I'm gonna line up my straight edge right against that fold that I've made, and then I'm gonna grab the top right hand corner of my paper. I'm pulling it against the straight edge and also towards me. So I'm kind of pulling at a diagonal across the paper. I'm holding really firmly with my left hand, and I'm just kind of tearing slowly and steadily. Now I'm demoing this with my right hand. If you're left-handed, all you would do is switch sides. So you'd be tearing from the left and pulling towards you. And I'm just slowly moving my hand down as I tear. What you end up with are sheets of paper that are all exactly the same size and perfectly square. You can just keep folding the paper in half until you have the number of sheets that you need. I needed 8, and here are my 8 sheets, all with a really nice soft torn edge. Before diving into your final frottage drawing, you want to sample some textures. For my frottage, I'm going to be using a number 2 litho crayon. I find these crayons to be rather large, and I like breaking them in half so that I have smaller pieces to work with and can do some more detailed work. The texture of these crayons is waxy, and they're actually rather soft. To do a rubbing, you want to take your material and lay it down under your sheet of paper. You'll want to use the flat side of your litho crayon and gently rub over the surface of your paper. You may want to use your other hand to feel out exactly where it was that you laid down your object so that you can get a good impression without having to search over the surface of the paper. Again, I want to reiterate that I'm using the entire flat side of the litho crayon, not an edge and not the point. At this stage in my process, I want to experiment with as many different textures as possible. I'm not worrying about how I'm arranging things on the paper. I'm just trying to capture as many different textures as possible. As you do this, you'll notice that there are some textures that really work and others that don't. Make note of both successful and unsuccessful experimentations. After you've collected all your texture samples, I recommend going through and labeling what each texture is. This way, you'll be able to refer back to it in case there is a particular pattern or value that you want to bring into your next drawing. Make note of which objects have surface textures that translate really well through rubbing, and which ones aren't as successful. Now that you have your library of textures to work from, we're ready to start our drawing. The two things that you want to think about when creating your drawing are texture and value, and what is the relationship between those two. I recommend doing a value study or thumbnail sketch before starting your large drawing. I've chosen this photograph to work with, and I've sketched out on this piece of paper where my darkest areas are and my lightest areas. I can then go through my library of textures and decide what objects might translate well to my mid values, what objects might provide lines that I can work with, what objects might translate well to my dark values, and start planning out how I'm going to construct this drawing. On your large paper, you'll want to use pencil to sketch out a rough outline of your composition. Don't get too detailed. These pencil lines are not going to stay part of your drawing. They will eventually be erased. They're just to guide your frottage marks. Using my value study as a reference, I can start adding in textures that correlate with the values and patterns that I want to bring into my drawing. I've decided that I want to use these branches, the ones that I documented earlier. There's two different types. I want to use those in the background behind the figure to create the mid values and also add in some more natural texture. I've placed the object under my drawing. I'm going to just gently feel out to make sure that I have it in the right spot, and then I can use my pencil sketch as a guide to figure out where my mark starts and where it stops. Again, I'm just lightly tracing over this material. I'm going to move it slightly so that I can add some more background, and I'll continue just taking a rubbing, moving the material around, and always using that pencil line as a guide for marking where one value stops and another begins. I'm going to speed up my drawing a little bit here so that we can see the image come together more quickly. When you're doing your frottage drawing, I recommend taking it slow, really considering every mark that you're making, and also just having fun with it. Experiment. If for some reason you feel like you have messed up, keep going. If you really need to, you can always collage other elements on top of it or start over. But this is really just an experiment. My goal here is not necessarily to create a drawing that's representational, but rather to create an image that captures the materials in my life and the way that they might correspond to how I represent myself. To finish up your drawing, you may want to add a few key marks with your litho crayon, as I'm doing here by drawing in the edge of my glasses. And then I think we'll call it done.